Hello all the serial pagloos. Today we are going to review Ghum hai kisi ke प्यार में. When I first started watching Ghum hai kisi ke प्यार में, I genuinely thought it was going to be something different. The premise felt fresh compared to the usual television serials. You have Virat and Paky meeting by chance, falling for each other almost instantly, and then getting separated by circumstances. Then the story shifts to Sai, whose father dies while saving Virat during a mission. Out of a sense of duty and responsibility, Virat marries Sai. But this is where my first problem with the story begins. I have never understood why marriage was presented as the only way for Virat to take responsibility for Sai. If his goal was to support her, educate her, provide financial security, or fulfill a promise made to her father, there were countless ways to do that without marrying her. Marriage is not a social welfare scheme. Marriage is an emotional commitment. It is supposed to involve love, trust, partnership, and mutual respect. Instead, the show begins with marriage where one person is still emotionally attached to someone else and the other person is thrown into completely unfamiliar environment. And that environment is what made this show one of the most toxic television series I have ever watched. The Chavan house did not feel like family home, it felt like a permanent battlefield. Almost every episode followed the same pattern. Sai would enter a room, say something, do something, or simply exist, and suddenly multiple family members would criticize her. They would come together to criticize her. There would be accusations, taunts, insults, judgment, and endless lectures. Sometimes it genuinely felt as if 5 or 6 people were standing in a hall waiting for their turn to insult her. What made it worse was that Sai was not even given the conditions she needed to succeed. If the entire purpose of this marriage was to help her build a future and complete her education, then she should have been given a peaceful environment, emotional support, and space to focus on her studies. Instead, she was constantly dragged into family politics and household conflicts. And then there is Virat. For me, Virat is one of the most frustrating male leads in ITV. The show constantly presents him as responsible, noble, and morally upright man. But when it actually matters, he repeatedly fails to establish clear boundaries. He often remains emotionally confused, especially regarding Paky. He frequently allows situations to escalate instead of addressing them directly, and many a times he is left to fight battles alone while the person who is supposed to support her stands in the middle, unable to take a firm stand. The love triangle is another major issue. A love triangle can work when it leads to character growth and resolution. Here, it often felt like the story refused to move forward because the unresolved tension itself became the source of endless drama. The same emotional conflicts kept returning again and again in slightly different forms. What frustrated me the most is that the show had the potential to explore meaningful themes. It could have been a story about healing after loss, two strangers gradually built a relationship, overcoming emotional baggage, and creating a healthy partnership. Instead, it often relied on misunderstandings, emotional manipulations, family interference, and repetitive conflicts. And honestly, this reflects a larger problem in many Indian television serials. Drama is treated as the ultimate goal. Healthy communication is avoided because it would solve problems too quickly. Characters who could settle an issue in 5 minutes spend months fighting about it. Growth is constantly interrupted because conflict keeps the story running. That is why I consider Ghum hai kisi ke प्यार में as one of the most toxic show I have watched. Not because it had few problematic characters, but because toxicity was built into the structure of the story itself. The marriage starts as an unhealthy foundation, the family environment is hostile, the communication is poor, the emotional boundaries are weak, and whenever the character seems ready to grow, the narrative pulls them back into the same cycle of conflict. For me, the biggest disappointment is not that the show was dramatic. Television dramas are supposed to be dramatic. The disappointment is that a story with an interesting premise and genuinely strong characters could have been so much more, but instead chose to repeatedly glorify dysfunction as entertainment. And then we have Paky, and honestly, this is where the story completely loses me. I can understand heartbreak, I can understand loving someone and not being able to move on immediately. That's human, but what I cannot understand is deliberately choosing a situation that guarantees more pain and then acting shocked when it becomes painful. Paky knew Virat was unavailable. She knew she was not marrying Virat, she was marrying his brother. Yet she chose to enter the same family because, according to the story, she wanted to remain close to Virat and see him every day. My question is why? How was that ever supposed to end well? If you genuinely love someone and circumstances separate you, the healthiest thing you could do is create distance and move forward with your life. Instead, Paki voluntarily places herself in the center of the problem. She marries Virat's brother, moves into Virat's house, and then spends years emotionally revolving around Virat. And then the show expects us to sympathize when she becomes jealous. Jealous of whom? Sai is not the other women. Sai is Virat's actual wife. That's the part that always frustrated me. Paki often behaves as if she has greater claim over Virat than the women he is legally and socially married to. Whenever Virat and Sai gets closer, she becomes upset. Whenever they share a moment, she interferes. Whenever their relationship progresses, she acts as though she has been wronged. But what actually was she expecting? You choose to marry someone else, you choose to enter the household, you choose to remain emotionally attached to a man who was no longer your partner. At some point, personal responsibility has to enter the conversation. What makes the situation even stranger is that after her husband leaves, she continues to remain trapped in the same emotional cycle. Instead of rebuilding her life, focusing on herself, pursuing her own goals, or creating a new future, she stays fixed on Virat and Sai's relationship. As a viewer, it became exhausting because her story stops being about growth and starts being about obsession. It was clear obsession. The tragedy is that Paki could have been a very compelling character. She could have been a realistic portrayal of someone dealing with lost love and learning to move on. She could have found independence, self respect, and new identity beyond Virat. And then comes the surrogacy track, which for me is where the story completely abandons common sense. By this point, Sai and Virat have finally gone through years of misunderstandings, emotional drama, family interference, and relationship struggles. They have finally confessed their love. Sai has achieved her dream of becoming a doctor. As a viewer, you think the story is finally moving towards stability. But no. The writers decide that peace is apparently illegal. Sai suffers a miscarriage, and then we get the classic television trope where the heroine is suddenly declared incapable of becoming a mother. If you have watched enough television serials, you can already predict these plots points before they happen. What I found even more unbelievable was that surrogacy decision. Out of all the women in the world, out of all possible options available, Virat and Sai somehow end up choosing Paki as their surrogate. Yes, Paki. The same Paki who has spent years emotionally attached to Virat, the same Paki who has repeatedly interfered in their marriage, the same Paki who has struggled to accept boundaries, the same Paki whose feelings for Virat have been obvious to everyone. And I am supposed to believe that this was considered a good idea. Even if we ignore the emotional history, from a purely practical perspective, this decision makes no sense. Surrogacy requires enormous trust, emotional maturity, and healthy boundaries between everyone involved. Why would anyone voluntarily create a situation where a person who already has unresolved feelings became so deeply involved in their family life? It feels less like a realistic decision and more like writers asking how can we create the maximum amount of drama possible. And what frustrates me the most is that none of the people around them seem capable of seeing what is right in front of their eyes. For years, Paki's attachment to Virat is obvious. It is obvious to the audience, to Virat, to Sai. Even when her own husband returns, he notices that something is wrong. So, how is it possible that an entire family remains blind to it? Or if they do see it, why does nobody establish clear boundaries? This is one of the biggest problems in the show. The characters constantly ignore situations that would concern any normal family. Then we reach another strange phase of the story. Sai and Virat separate yet again because of another misunderstanding, another trust issue, another conflict that could have been resolved if people simply communicated honestly. And after they leave, the situation became even more absurd. Sai is raising her daughter separately. Virat is raising his son. The son is growing up calling Paky his mother. And once again, everyone is maintaining a complicated lie to hide the truth. But the longer the truth is delayed, the more painful the eventual revelation becomes. Instead of solving problems, the story keeps postponing them. And this is where I completely lose sympathy for Virat as a character. If he truly loves Sai, why is he constantly creating situations that keep him emotionally entangled with Paky? If Sai is the love of his life, why are trust and communication always the first thing to disappear whenever a misunderstanding appears? A relationship cannot survive on declaration of love alone. It requires trust. And throughout the story, trust is the first casualty. Then we have the children who somehow end up becoming the most emotionally mature people in the entire show. The adults create the mess, the children try to fix it. The adults misunderstand each other, the children try to unite them, and the adults hide the truth, and the children bring everyone together. At some point, it feels as if the writer gave more common sense to the kids than to the grown ups. And then there is Paky. By this stage, she has become a character driven almost entirely by frustration, resentment, jealousy, and anger. She argues constantly, she interferes constantly, she lashes out at people around her. And then comes the ending after thousands of episodes. After endless misunderstandings, after separation, reunion, jealousy, sacrifice, emotional chaos, just when Sai and Virat seem close to finally getting the happiness that viewers have waited years to see, they die. They literally die.